Hello there, lovely people. My name is Duffy, sort of, and I have to tell you about starmites or I am going to explode into 100 million tiny pieces and blow away on the wind. What exactly is Starmites? I am certain you are asking. It's a musical. It's about superheroes. There's a lizard. And it is a clear and desperate bid to get late 80s teenagers to go to Broadway, written by grown men who clearly exclusively interact with other grown adult people in New York City. And a lot more, but we're going to get into that in a second. First, I want to talk to you about how all of this even happened. The musical Starmites premiered at the Criterion Center Stage Right on April 27th, 1989. It was actually the first musical ever staged at the Criterion Center, a theater that no longer exists because it was torn down to build a Toys R Us. And if that seems like a grim omen of what's to come, that's because it is. Starmites is a comic book sci-fi musical written by Barry Keating and Stuart Ross, and it was described as a space-age Peter Pan story. Very simple plot description. It's about a teenage girl who travels into the world of her favorite comic book and saves the world. Oh, you want to know if it's based on a real comic book? No, and it's never gonna be. If you know anyone even slightly aware of Starmites, the one thing they're going to know about it is that it is a tried and true Broadway flop. It's one of those shows that just kind of wasn't built to succeed. A thing the General Theater Institution kind of agreed with. It was nominated for 6 Tony Awards. Wanna guess how many it won? None of them. That was also like an incredibly sparse Tonys year. Don't get me wrong, the reason this show was nominated for 6 Tony Awards in the first place is because there was nothing else to nominate. Jerome Robbins' Broadway swept that year. Starmites actually only ever won one award in its entire run. Sharon McKnight, who plays the most see you next Tuesdayest villain of all time, won the Theater World Award, and she deserves it. She's fantastic in this. But an actress winning an award, I don't think, is necessarily indicative of the show. I need to make it very clear that I adore this show with every part of my being, obviously, but it was sort of doomed from the beginning, and I am not even talking about in premise or sales or lack of awards, like spiritually. There's a video from years later of Liz Larson, who plays our lead, talking about what a train wreck getting this show on its feet was, and it genuinely feels like the ghosts of musical theater history were coming together to try and wreck it from the inside out before it could get in front of an audience. During previews, the fire curtain came down mid-performance, soaking all of the annotated sheet music, so they had to close for 4 days so they could re-hand write it. And then later in the run, Larson got injured, and when her understudy was on, she got a gaping head wound and had to close out an act actively pouring blood from her skull. She then promptly quit, forcing Larson to come in and do the show while still injured. This show was so cursed that the entire cast and crew was convinced the theater was haunted by evil spirits, and the director had to hire someone to come and exorcise the space while they were supposed to be rehearsing. The universe was against this show, and I would love to sit here and tell you that Starmites valiantly fought it off, but they didn't. The show opened in April of 1989 to less than stellar ticket sales and neutral to negative media reception, if they were talking about it at all, and then closed quietly in June of 1989 after 60 performances and 35 previews. Doomed to general Broadway history obscurity and the stages of badly funded high school theater programs because the rights are inexpensive and it's got a pretty big female ensemble, honestly. There was a cast recording done in 1999, 10 years after the show closed and without a decent chunk of the original cast. And I wasn't alive then, let alone deeply entrenched in the sales numbers of niche musical theater albums in New York City. But I can't imagine that sold well, if it had a commercial run like at all. Starmites tried to fight off the machinations of the universe, but the universe won. Even with previews, they didn't even reach 100 performances. So you want to know the plot? But before we start, just a quick little tangent. I am going to be so fast, I promise, just for pure blanket honesty. I'm going to be going off this libretto I got off eBay a while ago for my description of the plot. It's actually really hard to nail down anything specific about the original Broadway run of this show because it was the late 80s and it wasn't very successful, so no one really bothered to keep track of anything like that, at least as far as I can find, which is part of why we're going into an in-depth plot description, because it's honestly hard to even find that online without buying a copy of the libretto off eBay. I've compared a lot of different versions of the libretto and scripts, and I think this is our best bet for OBC accuracy. It's pretty old, and fun fact about Starmites, every different version of the script gives the secondary 3 Starmites different names for some reason, and this version has the names they had on Broadway. So I'm choosing to believe it's correct. If you know otherwise and want to tell me in the comments, oh, please do, I would love to find out. We open on Eleanor Fairchild. Eleanor is our main character, and she is described in text as an appealing but unkempt teenager sitting on her bed amidst a pile of comic books. She is reading Starmites, which is her favorite comic book series, and the name of the musical. Here are some things we need to know about Eleanor. She is a nerd. She loves comic books, and they're her special interest to the extent that, she has this encyclopedic knowledge of every comic book she's ever read. It's a running bit in the show where when a thing will happen, she will reference down to the edition number and volume what page of a comic book this happened on, so she can think of a way to solve the problem like they did in that comic book. And she's constantly bullied at school to the extent that comic books and these characters are her only friends and form of escapism. Which is exactly when her mother comes in, the most 80s mother of all time, and goes, "Eleanor, baby girl, you would be so appealing if you weren't so unkempt. And that is the fault of the comic book, so we're selling them right now. I've already made the deal over the phone. Let's go." Which Eleanor doesn't love as a concept, but her mom says, "I don't give a shit," and leaves. Leading us into our first song! I love Superhero Girl so much. Does that mean it's a great song? That's debatable, but it's really fun. It's this show's I Want song, which, if you don't know what that is what it says on the tin, the song where we find out what our main character wants. And what Eleanor wants is to be a superhero girl. She is lamenting to her comic books and imagining this world where she could be a part of them. There's this weird 80s educational rap section. It rules. This song actually does something really interesting, though, with the pre-existing structure of, a musical theater number, and I want to talk about it. So, the way this scene is kind of set up is Eleanor is daydreaming and imagining that she is fighting off these evil droids sent by the main villain of Starmites, Shock Gra. He doesn't actually show up in the scene, he's just an ominous disembodied voice, but maybe keep him in mind. He might show up again later, who knows? And the way musical theater works, we are more willing to heighten our realities and take things less at face value. It's how they get away with people breaking into song and dance. Because of that, our first instinct isn't, oh, she's really having this battle. It's cool. This is how they're choosing to communicate to us that Eleanor has this big imagination and she's super creative, and quite how real the world of her imaginary comic books are to her. Except very quickly it becomes clear we have been lulled into a false musical theater sense of security, and no, Eleanor is actually being attacked by droids from outer space. A thing she also realizes around the same time, and her witty comic book banter turns into actual cries from help for her mother, that they're trying to kill her, someone needs to come help her, and then the droids descend, and she screams, lights out, end of prologue, welcome to Starmites. So Eleanor wakes up in comic book land, being strapped to a table like they're gonna vivisect her, and the ominous voice of Shakra comes back and says, and I quote, "But isn't this what you wanted? You've become your fantasy, now become mine," which, admittedly, is a metal line, but I don't think that's necessarily what she was talking about. When she said she wanted to be part of a comic book chakra, I think she kind of wanted to feministly punch people and not be tied to a table to be vivisected. I gotta make it clear, that's not actually why she's strapped to the table. They're not going to vivisect her. She's kind of just bait right now. But it sure feels like it. What? Oh, you want to know who Eleanor is being kept as bait for? The Starmites, baby! Here they are! Just kidding, only one of them shows up. But the leader of the Starmites swoops in and beats off droids and unstraps Eleanor from the table, and then is immediately captured, and she has to go save him, which really early establishes what their dynamic is gonna be. And as soon as they're both free, they don't, have this big battle scene. Shakra sort of goes, curse you, and him and his disembodied voice and his droids shuffle out. So Eleanor and the leader of the Starmites can talk and exchange information, which is nice of him. Suspicious, but nice. So let's take a second to talk about the leader of the Starmites, shall we? This is Space Punk. That's his good space Christian name, Space Punk, and he's the best character ever written. He's very Tanner from Teen Beach Movie coded, very noble but stupid, and he wears a stupid across the forehead headband and hammer pants, and he speaks like a Shakespeare character for some reason. And yes, okay, I understand that that doesn't sound like a relevant piece of information you need to know. And it's not, but I have to talk about it because it's an insane choice they make that I love so much. To put it into context, no one else in this musical talks like Space Punk. All of the other comic book characters just talk like normal comic book characters, like a little overdramatic, but people. And the other Starmites, who we haven't met yet, don't talk like that either. They just talk like normal 80s teenagers who were written by adult men. They say cowabunga. They're like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And then their leader, Space Punk, sounds like Romeo Montague for no discernible reason. I love it so much as a choice. And he calls Eleanor Milady, which is fine because he talks like that. And also, it's the 80s, so incels definitely existed, but we didn't have a word for it yet. That can't be true. Eleanor is understandably freaking out about being kidnapped and brought to a place she didn't think was real, and Space Punk tries to calm her with true love's kiss, because he's like that, and Eleanor shoots a fireball out of her hand at him and screams, "By the fires of Milady, no!" A thing she didn't know she could do, so now she's freaking out more than ever. Good job, Space Punk. And he, to his credit, immediately backs off and is like, hey man, that was overstepping and I'm so sorry. I love and respect you, but not actually, because you don't want that. I am so sorry. Unfortunately, this is when the other three Starmites barrel in from the bushes, having just seen a strange woman shoot a fireball at their leader. It's not a great first impression. Space Punk stops them, obviously, from just murdering Eleanor, and is like, guys, you're embarrassing me, that's Milady. And they know who Milady is as well, and immediately apologize. Yeah, turns out Milady isn't just a weird thematic nickname. It's a bespoke superhero woman. Space Punk explains that The gentle goddess of inner space, Origala, prophesies that a beautiful earthling maiden will restore order and harmony throughout our world. She will join the starmites in a preordained moment. Well, this is that moment, and here you are! All of the starmites are really excited because they are convinced that Milady is Eleanor. Because obviously Milady is Eleanor. Hello and welcome to Weird Window Lighting Editing Duffy, because I realized I name drop Origala and then do not specify that she's kind of important. So she's kind of important. Origala is the goddess of inner space who made all these prophecies about Milady and then dipped without doing anything actually about Chakra. I think later in the video I'm going to tell you that she's dead. I don't think she's dead, and I don't know where I got that from, but I'm going to keep it in because it's kind of incredibly funny to me, and also I'm not going to make her a puppet, so she needs to be represented. She's just going to be a shaft of light. Cool? Great, I hope you enjoy the rest of the video. Eleanor disagrees and actually is pretty convinced she's just being made fun of, so to convince her, the starmites give us our next song. There is actually recorded evidence of the original Broadway cast doing some of this song in their Tony performance. It is one of the best Tony performances of all time, and I need you all to go watch it. It'll be linked below. Watch this first, please, but after, please, you have to go watch it. It's incredible. Actually, I take it back. This song is kind of just talking about the starmites, so you should probably know who they are first. So we're going to do that first real quick. One sec. So we all know space punk, we all love space punk, but there are 3 other starmites. We've got space punk's second in command, the group's muscle and tough guy, Ackerman. The smart man with a plan who always references the Starmites handbook at all times, Herbie Harrison. And my favorite, the baby of the group, and kind of the fond bumbling idiot, Dazzle Razzledorf. Those are the starmites. They have matching red jackets. They are a found family of teenage boys who fight space crime, and if you're having trouble remembering who's who, they're pretty one-to-one the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I know I referenced them earlier for how they talk, but personality-wise, now they finally get to sing their song. The starmites inexplicably sing as a perfect barbershop quartet. They are the most 80s teenage boys ever created, and they sing in locked in, perfect, crisp, clean 4-part harmony. Herbie takes the highest notes, and it's crazy. The starmites sing at a increasingly frustrated Eleanor that, hey, they're the starmites. The mighty starmites, punks of the future are they? And she does eventually give in and join in on the song as sort of an overarching descant. I don't think that's the term for a barbershop quartet, but you know what I mean. They end the song with a rousing cheer of homina, homina, hey! And Space Punk asks her one last time, officially, if she will come help them save the world. And she agrees that she will to the best of her ability. She still doesn't quite believe that she's Milady, but she's willing to try. And he gifts her the Starmite Danger Whistle as a sign of mutual respect and a way to welcome her into the fold. It's really sweet. What the fuck was that? Oh, okay, that's just Trinculus, don't worry about it. Anyway, so suddenly, out of nowhere, a haunting melody begins to play, and trundling out of the woods, caught in a trap, is a pathetic, sopping wet lizard man who's singing about how sad he is, going, oh, it's me, Trinculus, and I need help, please, I'm just a little guy. I'm not counting what he does as a song. The starmites immediately want to kill him about it. Not anything specific he's doing, they just think he's weird and gross and want him dead. But Space Punk stops them now for the second time in one act from murdering first and asking questions later, and the lizard guy introduces himself as Trinculus, Chakra's recently escaped slave. He then immediately imprints on Space Punk and Eleanor and is like, hey, I'm your guys' slave now, and they just let him. They're cool. They don't dissuade it. It's normal. Eleanor honestly is mostly just embarrassed that her new slave seems to think that her and Space Punk are dating. That's her main qualm with it. They all suck. Trink then actually starts our next song this time. Trink's narration is inexplicably set to the lute. Trink has a lute. I don't think I have to tell you that the other songs in this show don't really have like a Renaissance festival vibe. Trink does. And he sings exposition at us, and Eleanor, but mostly us. He informs her that there is one weapon in all of inner space that Shock Gra can use to defeat Milady, and in turn can be used by Milady to defeat him. The cruelty. Trink openly admits that he knows where the cruelty is being kept. No one has any follow-up questions on how he knows that. I guess they just assume he overheard it while working for Shock Gra. But the starmites immediately want to physically threaten him to get the location out of him. Again, boys, this little lizard has done nothing to make them think he won't just tell them. But they want to hurt him so bad. Eleanor shuts it down this time, though, and politely asks for the location of the cruelty, and he tells her. It's in Shriekwood Forest. The starmites don't like that answer. They are very afraid of Shriekwood Forest, apparently, because it is crawling with banshees. We're gonna get into banshees. But Space Punk rallies the troops by asking, are we men or are we mites? Which is really funny, even though it doesn't work because they are both objectively men and mites. I guess they're boys. Mites is the correct answer. It leads into our next song. It's a hype-up song. They all sing about how they're not scared of the dark, and they dance their way into Shriekwood Forest, and that's about it. It's cute. They immediately get lost. Trinculus thinks he hears a banshee and immediately runs off. He is their guide, this is bad, and Space Punk has to go get him. So he gives his jacket to Eleanor and makes her the de facto leader while he's gone. This goes over very poorly because the starmites, 1, just met her, and 2, are canonically misogynistic. Yeah, so I have not brought it up because it has not been plot relevant, but the starmites are really misogynistic. They have a in-text reason to be. It's been a really long time since they've interacted with any non-evil women, but it's caused some problems, and they are not just willing to let a girl be the leader. She's a girl. But they respect Space Punk so much that when he gets upset and a little angry at them, they immediately back down and respect his judgment. It's not ideal, but it works. And then after what is like kind of a very tense moment, Space Punk straight up just goes, adieu, and skips off to go find Trinculus. He is the most Tamaki Suo-coded musical theater character ever written. To me! I love him so much. Adieu. He literally... Why does he speak French? He's from space! The second that Space Punk leaves, they immediately ignore Eleanor and start arguing about what to do, but she pulls rank and references an X-Men comic, because that's what she does, and tells them it's bedtime. Growing bodies need rest to save the world. And the starmites are kind of concerned about being murdered in their sleep, but Eleanor is like, it's fine. And she casts a little Milady spell, kind of on purpose, kind of accidentally, to help them calm down and go to sleep. And that's our next song. This song is essentially a lullaby. It's cute, but there's not a ton going on. I don't love the single teen girl in the group is the mother figure vibes it kind of brings, but it's pretty, and there's a couple fun character moments, like Dazzle goes to sleep really easily, but Ak is really stubborn because he wants to protect his friends, so Eleanor has to, like, sing extra hard at him. And eventually they fall into their quartet with Eleanor taking the place of Space Punk to sing about how they're gonna wake up and save the world. Unfortunately, there's another song right after that, which is never good. If the name of this song and the fact that it comes immediately after another one concerns you, That's a good instinct. The Banshees show up and immediately start singing one of the wildest songs I have ever heard. It's really layered and there's parts in the round and it's so cool. And fun fact, the person who owned this libretto before me actually played a Banshee, so all those parts are highlighted. I hope they had a good time. It's a really cool role. But in honor of that person, let's explain what a banshee is. We learn that the banshees are a warrior race of alien women who work under the evil queen of inner space, Diva. They are very serious and hate specifically men. The starmites do fall under that category. And they wear like leather dominatrix style outfits mixed with Roman centurion shit. They look so cool. The leader of the Banshees and Diva's sergeant-in-arms is named Shotzi, but she's got 3 main lackeys, and they are Balbraca, who delights in terrorizing the starmites, Cannibel, who delights in devouring the starmites, and Maligna, who delights in torturing the starmites. And here they come! It's implied that Shock Gra, alerted Shotzi of the location of the starmites, so she gathers her forces to go hunt them down and kill them, I'm pretty sure. The end of the song is just kind of like a repeating verse of Dead Boys Tell No Tales. This is also the song where we find out that the starmites are human. They're not a separate alien race. They were raised in inner space, but they are totally human boys. And I don't think that's super relevant, but it is interesting to me. And then they show up and they capture Eleanor and the sleeping starmites. Okay, so the starmites and Eleanor get kidnapped, and I understand why that has to happen for plot reasons. But why would they have that happen immediately after a scene where the starmites are misogynistic and think Eleanor would be a bad leader because she's a girl, and then the first thing she does as leader is get them kidnapped, the thing they were worried is gonna happen in the first place? Look, I don't want her to be perfect. It actually kind of makes sense that she messes up. She is not prepared to be the leader of the starmites. Not because she's a girl, but because she went to normal, just Earth high school yesterday, and these boys have been fighting space crime their entire lives. But putting this right after the scene where they're misogynistic about how she would be a bad leader because she's a girl implies that this happened sort of because she was a bad leader because she was a girl. We aren't supposed to think their misogyny is correct. It's a bad thing. And then they immediately vindicate. I just don't understand why they didn't have, Eleanor wanted them to keep moving and the starmites wanted to go to sleep. And so by not listening to her, it proved that they were wrong and she's a good lead. I don't get it. It's such a weird choice. Anyway, they get kidnapped by banshees and taken to the Queen of Inner Space, Diva. Because Eleanor's a bad leader, because she's a girl. We switch over to Space Punk, who has finally caught up with Trinculus, and is standing in front of a place we are told is called the Castle Nemesis. Conveniently, the place that the cruelty is being kept. They go in and see it just kind of hanging from the ceiling and decide, okay, this is perfect. We'll grab that, take it to Eleanor, she'll save the world, easy peasy, then we're done. So Trink goes to grab the weapon of mass destruction and is immediately electrocuted and thrown across the room because it's a weapon of mass destruction that could destroy or save the entire universe. Obviously, it is being guarded by something. And that is around when a horde of banshees storm in. Trinculus and Space Punk hide in the corner and get ready for a fight by saying, "We must swash. We must buckle," which is so good, and I need to add it to my everyday vernacular. But the banshees aren't here for them. In fact, they don't even notice them. They just walk right past them. Because they're here to present Eleanor and the 3 starmites to Diva. Uh-oh. This song is perfect. It's also the second half of their Tony Award performance that you need to go watch, so once again, do that after this. but it's also fully just introducing Diva. So let's talk about who she is first. Diva is sort of our secondary antagonist. She is the queen of inner space, as I've said before, and she does hate Chakra. That is one of the first things we learn about her. The second thing we learn about her, though, is that she hates the Starmites as well. She doesn't like either of them. She rules the Banshees through complete fear and is a mother to a daughter that we will meet later. This entire song is just Diva power strutting around a stage going, you guys don't even, like, understand how difficult it is to be so sexy and, like, powerful and cool and busy because I'm the queen. My life is really hard. And at one point, she admits it's hard to be the diva, but it's so much harder not to be because, oh my god, look at her. It's a fantastic song. It's great. And the Banshees join in, and once it's done, present the Starmites. And they call them male chicks because they're kids, which I think is funny. Diva's immediate plan is just to murder the Starmites now that they're here, but they jump in and try to plead their case. Well, Dazzle jumps in and tries to plead their case and immediately messes up and insults her and makes it worse, so Herbie, like, pushes him down and takes over because he's the one who should have been doing it in the first place. And he tells her that they want to work together with her to defeat Chakra and save the universe. They are fully improvising. This is a solid plan, but it is not the one they wanted to do. They did not want to work with Diva. And it doesn't work. She gets extra mad at them because they've said Chakra's name in her home and wants to kill them harder until Eleanor steps forward and announces herself as Eleanor from Earth. And Diva knows what that means. She knows who Milady is. Everyone knows who Milady is. Milady is the girl destined to take Diva's throne from her. And she doesn't like Chakra. But she likes that concept way less. This is how we discover that Diva herself can channel the power of the cruelty as her own magic, and she uses it to try and extra double hard murder Eleanor. The Starmites jump in and try and protect her, but they are woefully outnumbered, so Diva knocks Eleanor out and uses the cruelty to freeze the Starmites in place. As soon as the Banshees drag Eleanor's body away, she's going to just destroy the Starmites then and there. Except the disembodied voice of Chakra appears and tells her to be gentle with his humans. Which is interesting. That's interesting characterization, huh? What is it, huh? Diva threatens to just kill Chakra then and there with the cruelty, but he just laughs at her. That's not the prophecy. She can't do that. And then he leaves, leaving her very unsettled, because that means that guy is in her house and can see her and what she's doing, and she doesn't love that. So she tells her Banshees that actually, hey, maybe she was a little hasty in turning down the Starmites' offer to help. Because actually, there's another prophecy that we haven't heard about, where when Banshee bride weds human groom, Chakra shall meet his doom. And they've got some human groom options right there. And she's got a Banshee bride option, so we can make that happen. Which is how we meet Bizarbra. Bizarbra is Diva's only daughter, and she's played by the same actress who plays Eleanor, which is why Eleanor had to be knocked out and dragged off stage before this scene could happen. She is, however, unlike Eleanor, in that she is a kempt but unappealing teenage girl. And Bizarbra loves Earth books. Earth books are just comic books, but other way around, so they're about Earth. And she's just like Eleanor, where she has all of these volumes and pages memorized, but about things like cafeteria food and going to prom and having to do chores. So Bizarbra is called into the throne room, and after being chastised by her mother for having her nose stuck in an Earth book, she is told she is going to marry one of the 3 Starmites still magically frozen in front of her. And Bizarbra is immediately a little hesitant. She's worried that they're not going to like her, and what if they don't want to get married to her? But Diva dismisses her feelings completely and tells her she'll be fine, as long as she remembers the conceptual dance of spousal arousal. She does not remember the conceptual dance of spousal arousal, but Diva does not listen to her when she tries to tell her that, and shoos her off to go get ready. She's got a dance to plan. The second all of the banshees leave with Bizarbra, Diva does kind of have a breakdown and sings a mini version of Hard to Be the Diva. This is not a plan she likes. She's putting on a front. She's stressed. We then switch back over to Eleanor, who is once again restrained on a metal table like she's going to be vivisected. At least she's unconscious for it this time. And Space Punk, who, reminder, has been here this entire time, sneaks in and recites a little monologue over her unconscious body, and then wakes her the way they did in Tales of Old, with true love's kiss. And it works, and then Eleanor freaks out, because, one, this is the second time this boy has kissed her without her permission, or at least tried to, and two, that was her first kiss, and maybe she's old-fashioned, but she's always wanted to save it for, and then her and Space Punk say in perfect synchronicity, the one whose heart is a casement for trust and whose soul is a protector for truth. Which must be a quote from the Starmites, but it's unclear. But either way, Eleanor is really touched that he knows that, and Space Punk admits that that was his first kiss too. And Eleanor doesn't believe him, but he sings a love song to her about how she is the girl of his dreams, and she sings back that he's the boy of her dreams, and it's the sweetest, corniest, most 80s musical theater duet you could possibly imagine. But it's very cute. However, it is interrupted right at the end before they can kiss again by Trinculus, who runs in to tell them that, hey, the Starmites are very in trouble. And Space Punk has to go rescue him. That's his team. Those are essentially his little brothers. But he tells Eleanor that she has to go wait for him in the Great Hall, and he'll save them, and then they'll meet up. Which we, as an audience, know why they have to split up, because Eleanor has to become Bizarbra. But in the actual story, it makes no sense for this to be happening. It's not like she has another mission they need to complete. They're just splitting the party. It's implied it's to keep her safe, but it's not directly stated, and it's how they got into this situation in the first place. But they have to, because Bizarbra needs to do the conceptual dance of spousal arousal, so I don't know, man. Diva unfreezes the now very confused Starmites back in the throne room and informs them they're getting married, which they aren't thrilled about. Akak has commitment issues. Dazzle's too young. Herbie's gay. That's not like a joke I'm making. That's what he says in the text as the reason he can't get married to Bizarbra. And like most productions play it as a joke, like he's saying it not seriously, but I choose to believe it. The text doesn't dispute it. Happy Pride. Diva doesn't care, though. She also doesn't want her daughter marrying any of them. So they certainly don't have to like it. This is to save the universe, okay? Which leads us into the way banshees apparently choose a husband is through the title of the song and the words I've said too many times already, the conceptual dance of spousal arousal, which is the banshees rhythmically singing Bizarbra's name as she dances very badly with each Starmite. Akak, like, holds on physically really hard and then gets knocked over, and Herbie, famed homosexual, really tries to, like, actually dance with her and also gets knocked over, and Dazzle, after seeing all this and being surrounded by banshees who he's terrified of, just stands frozen until he passes out. Which, Bizarbra's not a very good dancer, but that one's not her fault. This is the scene that fully solidifies Dazzle's baby brother status with the rest of the Starmites, because the second he passes out, Herbie and Akak get so genuinely angry with Bizarbra. They have not cared at all when the other two got knocked over, but the second he knocks himself over, let's be clear, they're like, hey, what did you do? He bruises easily, how dare you? And Bizarbra does feel really bad about it, but Diva's mad, and she decides, fuck the universe, they disrespected my perfect baby girl, I'm gonna torture them till dead. Which is when Space Punk appears and goes, hey, no you're not gonna torture them till dead, I'm here. Stop it. Diva is livid to see Space Punk. Reminder, no one knew he was here except Eleanor and Trinculus. A battle ensues that ends with Diva capturing him, the Starmites, and Tranquillus, all with the cruelty, and she threatens to kill them for the 5 millionth time. There's so much threatened teen murder in this musical when Bizarbra steps forward and declares that she has decided on a husband. Space Punk, which is a problem because he has just had his first kiss with the one whose heart is a casement for trust and whose soul is a protector for truth. All of the Starmites and Banshees audibly say, "Oh no!" And Bizarbra runs off crying, which is also what I would do if I declared my husband and everyone audibly in unison went, "Oh no!" Space Punk does very politely try and say that he can't, but Diva has all of the Banshees put a finger to the Temple of the Starmites and threaten to drain them of their blood, so that's apparently a thing the Banshees can do, and he's kind of blackmailed into saying yes. This is when Eleanor walks in just in time to overhear Space Punk declare that he loves Bizarbra, completely and totally to the exclusion of all others, and she believes he's telling the truth. And I really don't want to give her a hard time because she's a teenager who's had one hell of a day. But if I was watching my very recent boyfriend in obvious duress, surrounded by his baby brothers who have guns essentially held to their heads, I think I'd take everything he said, like, with a grain of salt. But she believes him and decides she misread him completely, and actually he can't be the one whose heart is a casement for trust and whose soul is a protector for truth, and cries and immediately gets recaptured by Banshees. And that's the end of Act 1. There are so many scenes in this musical that would have been like such a dramatic cliffhanger to end Act 1. Children's lives are threatened constantly. And instead, they decided to end this act with like stale teen movie miscommunication breakup drama. And God, I wouldn't have it any other way. This show rocks. We open right on a song, and what a song to open with. This is a crazy fugue number of the Banshees preparing Bizarbra's wedding, which means they all have overlapping, repeating melody lines in different placements and with different vibes. And it confirms that Space Jesus is real and alive, and the Banshees are kind of like the nuns from Sound of Music. They sing Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. Christian God exists, apparently, but the most fun part of this song, to me, is Bizarbra's verse. She gets to sing a reprise of Superhero Girl called Ordinary Girl, about how all she wants is to just be a normal Earth girl who's has to deal with pop quizzes and boyfriends, and her mom makes her apple pie. And I'm once again devastated by the implications of a double-casted role, because her and Eleanor would be best friends. The wedding begins, and the Starmites are all kind of Space Punk's groomsmen, but they're also shackled in a line at the ankle. It's a very funny image. And Space Punk immediately bails. It's been about 15 minutes, and he takes it back and decides, actually, I love Milady too much, and I cannot do this. He's very apologetic about it, and he tells Bizarbra that she's great. He's just already in love. And she runs out crying, which once again is the only fair response. Before Diva can try to kill him again, him and the Starmites sing her a song. This is, I genuinely think, one of the best songs in the show. It is just so fun and good to listen to, and I have listened to it on loop making this video. It is a doo-wop number about how much he loves Milady and how she's his lady, but someday she'll be his girl. And they do this doo-wop choreography, but they're all shackled at the ankle still. About halfway through the song, the other Starmites stop singing and start whistling the melody so Space Punk can have his, like, boy band soliloquy where he's like, "Hey girl, I know you think I'm a traitor and a chauvinist." And I don't know what that last word means, but I love you. It's fantastic. And the Banshees honestly are kind of won over by this song. They think it's sweet. Diva is not, and she freezes all the starmites because it's the easiest way for the plot to deal with them, and decides she's going to kill Space Punk and Eleanor. Sort of. Diva sweeps into where Eleanor is once again being kept in vivisect position and yells at her for ruining her baby girl's wedding, which confuses Eleanor because she had been fully convinced that Spacepunk was being honest when he said that he loved Bizarbra. And even Diva is like, no, you idiot. I made him say that. He just sang an entire song about how much he loves you. And this is really bad for Eleanor's current safety, but she's honestly just really happy that he is the one whose heart is a casement for trust and whose soul is a protector for truth. Diva tells Eleanor that her current plan is to body swap Eleanor and Bizarbra and trick Spacepunk into marrying Bizarbra in Eleanor's body, while Eleanor is off being, like, kempt in unappealing somewhere else. Eleanor tries to fight back, obviously, but the Banshees lock her in one of 2 chambers of psycho sorcery. Bizarbra comes into a scene this time crying, and Diva tries to comfort her by telling her by the end of today she'll be beautiful and married and queen of inner space, and Bizarbra just sort of thinks her mom is trying to make her feel better, but Diva sits her down and tells her no. She's got a plan. Beauty Within is one of those songs that's way nicer out of context. It's a duet between Diva and Bizarbra, where Diva sings about how Bizarbra is the most beautiful person she knows because she is kind and clever and smart and lovely inside, and beauty within is all that matters. And then Bizarbra has a really devastating verse about how she knows she's ugly and people look at her with pity when she walks by. And by the end, they sing together about how beautiful Bizarbra is and how beauty inside is really what matters, which would be a really nice sentiment if her mother wasn't about to put her in a machine that swaps her into a more conventionally attractive body. Like, where it sits in the show, it less feels like this beautiful moment and more feels like Diva is lying to her ugly kid until she stops crying enough to get in the box. Back in the Great Hall, Diva unfreezes all of the starmites, including Spacepunk, and says, "Okay, I've thought it over. I was being unfair. I never should have made you marry someone you don't love. So, as a show of good faith so we can keep working together to defeat Chakra, I'm gonna marry you and Milady right now." And out comes Bizarbra disguised as Eleanor. To Spacepunk's credit, he does immediately flag that something is off because Bizarbra looks really upset, but Diva brushes them off and shoves them up onto the altar. Trinculus, remember him, shows up and is like, "I'm Trinculus. Let me play music at the wedding." And the Banshees all immediately want to kill him upon sight, like the Starmites did. Something about this guy makes people really want to murder him, but Diva stops at this time and is like, "Hey, it's a wedding. He can play the lute. We need wedding music," and gives Trinculus the cruelty so he can play the cruelty stomp at the wedding. This is when we find out that the cruelty, the all-powerful, weirdly shaped instrument of destruction or salvation, is an electric guitar. Everyone at the wedding starts dancing to this Transylvania Mania, Never Had a Friend Like Me jazzy little ditty with such cool, casual lyrics such as, "It'll really hypnotize you with its magical sound, it'll make you do all kinds of things you never did do, and dance to the music of the cruelty, take a chance on the music of the cruelty, sigh with the magic of the cruelty, die to the magic of the cruelty." And it very quickly becomes clear that they're not just dancing because they enjoy it, they are being compelled to dance, as though Trinculus is puppeteering him with the music of this all-powerful electric guitar. And then the song ends. Or, well, the song changes. Trinculus slams the cruelty into the ground, throwing everyone onto the floor, and starts singing a dark, twisted version of the cruelty stomp, telling them they're never gonna win, Shock Gra is a god, and Trinculus knows this because he is Shock Gra. And he has been this entire time. Everyone's a little bit stunned, both from the cruelty and also probably from realizing that their instinct to murder the lizard on sight was completely correct and they shouldn't have been stopped. And Shock Gra uses this moment to take Bizarbra, who he thinks is Milady, as his sacrifice. Diva yells, trying to tell him that that's not Eleanor, but he doesn't believe her. Obviously, her plan is really crumbling around her. Shock Gra scoops up Space Punk for good measure and disappears in a ball of evil lightning, shouting doom, which is about when Eleanor shows up, much to the confusion of everyone because they just saw her get kidnapped. Eleanor and Diva just kind of sit down and throw themselves a pity party about how they doomed the universe, which is more true for one of them than the other, and it's not the high schooler. And this leads to my favorite character interaction in the entire show between Diva and Dazzle, in which Diva says, "No, my shabby intrigues have brought us to this woeful pass. I was blind, I was foolish, Shock Gra in my very clutches, and I just hand him the cruelty. Oh, death, death, misery, and despair." And Dazzle responds with, "Bummer." All hope seems lost until Ak steps into his role as Starmite's second in command and leads the charge to go save their boy and girl who looks like Eleanor for some reason. That has not been explained to him. Eleanor tells them no, that she is clearly not Milady and they wasted their time on the wrong girl and she's just gonna make everything worse. And the Starmites immediately read her to absolute filth. They're like, "Come on, man. You gotta buck up. I really don't care. You are the only possible person who can save the universe right now. So let's just try. Okay?" Okay, and she's like, "I've had a long day." And they're like, "We've all had a long day, Eleanor." And Ak, as Starmite's second in command, launches into... This is a super rousing number about how you've got to just dig down deeper than you ever thought you could and believe in yourself and work together. Ak starts it and then Herbie and Dazzle join in, and it's very clear they're emulating Space Punk and how he's been as a leader and how we've seen him sing and talk throughout the show, which is really cute, actually. And they managed to actually convince Diva and the Banshees. Not Eleanor quite yet, but now all of them are working together to try and convince Eleanor, and this number just builds and builds and builds until it's this massive gospel-style song because Space Jesus exists, and finally, Eleanor joins in. It does take her a while. Like, it takes her a really long time to be convinced, but she is, and she takes over from Ak and leads the charge to defeat Shock Gra. I'm proud of you, baby girl. I know that was hard. We go to the sacrificial lab with the pit behind it, which is such a name for a place to have. Space Punk is begging Shock Gra to kill him instead. Milady's too nice, you can't kill her, and Shock Gra mocks him by saying, yeah, she's nice. That's why she's the perfect sacrifice. Apparently, the dark powers really like kind souls. Shock Gra goes into this evil villain monologue in which he reveals that he is actually also Trinculus. I always sort of assumed that Trinculus was a fake identity he put on to trick the Starmites, but no. That's his real name. Like, he was born a weird little lizard dude named Trinculus, and everyone, including his mother, wanted to murder him on sight about it, and that's what made him evil. I don't love what he's doing, but to be fair, that would also make me evil, probably. I don't know why this is such a funny detail to me, that, like, Shock Gra is basically his evil space drag persona. I think it's just because it's so unnecessarily risky for him to have used his real name in the first place. Like, he couldn't think of another one, and I guess The 17-year-old he is currently monologuing at is not going to know his birth name because he's been an evil space dictator for like decades. But anyone who was familiar with him as a child and wanted to murder him because he was so gross could have ruined this plan in a second. And it's so funny he couldn't have just thought of a different name. Why did he do that? Bizarbra, who is also here and very well aware that these two guys think she is Milady, asks, hey, so hypothetically, purely hypothetically, theoretically, if you were to throw someone who isn't Milady into the pit, what would happen? And Chakra very cockily tells her, well, that would destroy any control he'll ever have over Earth. So she nods and says, okay, I'm ready then. Bizarbra willingly goes to the edge of the pit and does this very nice little monologue about all the people she's doing this for. And Space Punk calls out for her and tries to stop her and calls her Milady. And in the coolest move of all time, she looks at him and goes, I'm not Milady. Puts on her glasses, says, I'm just someone who loves you. And before Chakra or Space Punk can stop her, she jumps into the pit, sacrificing herself to save the world. Hell yeah. Chakra starts freaking out. This wasn't supposed to be how it went. He was winning. And now one mistake, just the wrong girl, and everything is ruined. He starts reverting back to Trinculus and begging to be loved before snapping back into himself, picking up the cruelty, and trying to kill Space Punk. He's not doing this for any particular reason. He's demanding to know where Milady is, but it doesn't matter at this point. He is lost. He is just angry and trying to do something about it. He demands one last time where Milady is, and Eleanor makes herself known. And we begin our final battle. Chakra attacks Eleanor with the cruelty, and she sings back that he'll never win because she's got the real power. The power of love, because it's 1989. And they are actually pretty evenly matched until the other starmites rush in, so excited to see that Eleanor and Space Punk are alive and okay. They don't know about Bizarbra, they're not being insensitive on purpose, and they join in on the fight, and through the power of friendship and love, Milady is able to back Chakra up and shove him in to his own sacrifice pit. What a way to go. I feel like if you're the kind of person who makes a sacrifice pit, you've got to be at least a little aware that, like, there is a solid chance you might die via ironic sacrifice pit mishap. You're just kind of tempting fate. The starmites are celebrating, Eleanor and Space Punk kiss, and Diva rushes in pretty late. Where was she? They left together, and congratulates them and thanks them for saving inner space. And, the dead space goddess Oragala possesses Shotzi and the stage erupts in light? Yeah, I thought it was going to be dealing with the death of Bizarbra too, but no. You remember that space goddess from the beginning of the show? She's here now. Yeah. Okay, so you know how Eleanor and Bizarbra parallel each other because they both feel out of place, and Eleanor wants to be a superhero girl, but she's from Earth, and Bizarbra wants to be an ordinary girl, but she's a banshee. Oragala explains that that's because they were swapped at birth. Yeah, okay, so dying space goddess Oragala took little baby Eleanor, Diva's real daughter and a banshee, and put her on Earth for her own safety, and then took Bizarbra and sort of put her in the cradle of Diva's kid as a scapegoat. And as she's explaining this, even she's like mean about Bizarbra and tells her she grew up awkwardly. Like, baby girl sacrificed herself by committing suicide 20 minutes ago. Can we cut her a single break, please? And Eleanor, being Diva's birth daughter, means she is the rightful queen of inner space. Thank God she didn't earn the title, like, through skill. We're gonna keep it in the family. Orgala then explains that Bizarbra actually didn't die. When she jumped into the pit, she fell through the universes back to her rightful place on Earth. And she can stay there as long as Eleanor is willing to keep the balance and live in inner space. Forever. Eleanor can be Milady. She can be the superhero girl she's always dreamed of being. But she'll never see her home again, and she will never see her mother again. And this is presented as this very weighty decision, and it takes Eleanor 0.5 seconds to be like, obviously I'm staying here. Because obviously she's staying here. If she went back to Earth, all she would be going back to is getting brutally bullied every day, and her emotionally neglectful mother who is going to sell the only thing that brought her any joy. And here, she gets to live out her cool self-insert space fantasy fan fiction, date her favorite comic book hero, and be a princess. There's no world in which going back to Earth was even a consideration. And to show that she means it and is confident in her decision, she proposes to Space Punk right there. And he says yes. Obviously, he would have said yes if she asked him the first time they met. And because Diva is actually Eleanor's biological mother, this means a banshee bride is marrying a human groom. And that fulfills the prophecy. And Oragala says she can reverse the corruption done by the cruelty and revert the banshees back to how they were before they were trapped under its influence. A thing we didn't know needed to happen. We didn't know that the cruelty had corrupted the banshees in any way, but it had apparently. So what were they before? Oh. Starmites. The banshees immediately remember and break into their own rendition of the Starmites song from the beginning. It's really cute, and they sing about how now they're the Starmites. The mighty Starmites, they fight for the right and unite to be free. And the original 4 Starmites are really confused, mostly just because they thought they were the only ones left. But they're bought in super quickly and start singing their own version of Diva's song, where they're accepting the new Starmites and also sort of making fun of Diva about how when she dies, Eleanor's gonna take her throne. And that, my friends, is where we leave the Starmites. At a teen wedding, celebrating saving the universe and quadrupled in numbers. What a great way to end the show, right? This fun reprise of the 2 biggest numbers of the show, everyone's getting along, the 2 leads are happily together. Except that's not the ending. Instead, Bizarbra wakes up in Eleanor's bed. Confused, but not really upset. In fact, this is the kind of Earth bedroom she's always dreamed of having. And Eleanor's mother rushes in because there was this horrible crashing noise, presumably from when Bizarbra fell from the sacrifice pit back to Earth, and she's immediately concerned because her daughter is talking very strangely, almost like she doesn't know who she is, which we as the audience know she doesn't. And actually, Bizarbra is taking this very well. She's sort of just like, Eleanor, that's such a pretty name. Is that my name? This is such a pretty room. But her mother is understandably worried about all of that, and she tries to soothe Bizarbra, now Eleanor, with the thing she knows comforts her daughter most, and begins to read to her from one of her comic books. It's a Starmites comic entitled The Reign of Diva and Her True Daughter, and that triggers something in Bizarbra, now Eleanor's brain, and she starts to panic about how she's gonna get home. And Oragala does perhaps the only nice thing she has ever done for Bizarbra and fills her in, presumably from goddess heaven, because she's still dead, and soothes her that she's okay. She's back to her true home. Everything is all right. Eleanor's her mother tries to comfort a very confused and distraught Bizarbra by singing this almost lullaby and telling her that it was just a dream. But she knows it wasn't. Bizarbra knows that she can't go back and that this is where she belongs, but still, it wasn't a dream, it was real. And she sings as much, telling her mother about everything that happens as her mother still tries to comfort her. From their own universe, Milady and the Starmites and Diva sing to Bizarbra, thanking her and reassuring her that it was real, And she did it, so now she can rest in her own world that she saved. Bizarbra, now Eleanor, embraces her mother, happily accepting this new life, finally back where she was always meant to be. And hey, sue me, but I think that's a better ending than the teen wedding. It's very sweet and it really wraps everything up. Bizarbra just genuinely deserves to have that moment. So it's so nice to be able to close the curtain on her and her. Okay, so actually, so after the beautiful embrace between mother and daughter, a bony little lizard hand claws its way up from behind the bed, out of view from Bizarbra and her mother, and Shakra grins directly at the audience. Blackout. That is the end of Starmites the Musical. God damn it! Yeah, so that's how Starmite ends. With like a weird, sinister implication for a sequel. You know that thing that always does well, musical sequels? Obviously it didn't get one. It's a perfect musical. It's a perfect ending. I love this stupid fucking show so much. I'm sorry if the audio or the lighting here sucks way more than on the other sections. I genuinely couldn't fathom setting up my filming space right now, so we're on a bed. I genuinely love pretty much every aspect of this show, but I think one of my favorite parts is how it uses its music. Not every song is necessarily my cup of tea. There are some agonizingly sappy 80s ballads in there that are fine, not for me. But something I find insanely fascinating is that this isn't a show with one distinct musical style. Instead, each of the characters or main character groupings have their own unique song style. This is something that becomes far more clear when you listen through the whole soundtrack, but I just think it's such a fun choice, especially for such a densely packed show of characters. It immediately communicates information that we need to know about them written into the music. I'm going to start this by talking about the titular Starmites because I think they really encapsulate what I'm trying to talk about here, especially because the Starmites as a group have a very different style than Space Punk when he's singing on his own. As I said before, the Starmites are a barbershop quartet, which is still the funniest possible choice, but it's also very smart. It's a very bright, silly, candy-coated sound because yes, the Starmites are goofy, stupid teenage boys, but it's also very technical. You don't really romp your way into a tight 4-part harmony. You rehearse it. The Starmites are objectively going by the book. And okay, I am well aware that I could be reading way too much into this, but the Starmites are sort of why I don't think I am. Because it would be 1,000 times easier to just give them a normal, boring pop boy band sound or upbeat musical theater kind of classic noise, and then just use the text to contrast their personalities to their heroic actions. But they don't. They want to show us on a musical level that while these are kids who are very silly and having fun, they are also very competent and they're working as a unit. And isn't that interesting? And then when Space Punk is singing on his own and not leading a tiny militia, he isn't nearly as technical. He gives us that boring pop heartthrob boy band sound because on his own, Space Punk is sort of just an overly romantic 18-year-old boy. There's actually a lot of depth to Space Punk as a character that you see exclusively through his songs. You can actually take him apart layer by layer through each number and understand more about his character. There's this locked-in leader of the Starmites who's part of the barbershop quartet holding down the melody. There is the older brother encouraging pep talky version of Space Punk, who is a very like Elton John I'm still standing kind of vibe. And then we've got what I honestly think is probably the most honest part of Space Punk, which is when he's singing to or with Eleanor. That's very romantic and soft and like George Michael-y. We don't really get to see the other starmites sing much outside of a group context, but when we do, we get a kind of clear picture of where their still developing styles are heading towards. During Reach Right Down, by the end when they have to take charge, they are emulating Space Punk's power ballady leader style, and it's very cute. Eleanor, I think, has one of the most interesting musical progressions of all the characters. Pretty much everyone else sticks to their own styles outside of group numbers, but hers morphs. Eleanor is our ingenue, so she gets to be our ingenue. A lot of her songs, honestly, are in conjecture with group numbers, in which case she blends right in. But when she sings on her own or in a duet, she gets that peak musical theater treatment. It's very mixy and pretty. Think like Disney Princess or Olive Ostrovsky from 25th Annual Putnam County Spelling Bee. And even that does communicate something about her character. She's a young girl, and she's very sweet and smart and a little uncertain. Even musically, she's playing it very safe. Honestly, for the bulk of the show, the most interesting song that Eleanor sings is Superhero Girl, and it's important to note, she thinks she's singing that song completely alone, so she's letting herself be silly and embarrassing because there's no one around to witness it while still holding on to like her stylistic motifs. When she's singing in front of other characters, it is back to soft and pretty and careful. But as the show goes on, that starts to shift. I said before that she blends into a lot of group numbers, which every character does. That's kind of the point of a group number. But it happens constantly with Eleanor. A lot of songs that she's in happen around her, and then she joins in about halfway through. I think a really good example of this is Scared of the Dark. It's a quintessential space punk song. It's very poppy and punchy and cheesy. It's a big hunk of gorgonzola, and when Eleanor joins in, she's clearly trying to match the tone of it, but it fits noticeably worse than even when the other starmites, who we haven't necessarily heard the sound from before either, jump in. There's a cognitive dissonance to what we've heard from her before. No matter what, Eleanor is committing to it, and she's having a lot of fun, and we're reminded that she's not totally unfamiliar with the styles happening in front of her. These are her favorite comic book characters. She has wanted to be a part of this world since before she knew it was real and that was an actual possibility. There's a willingness there to adapt that sort of foreshadows her eventual transformation into Milady. She's not a part of here yet, but she's willing to be. She's an active participant. And then, by immolation, there's another shift in how Eleanor's character is approached musically. It's still musical theatery and it's still pretty, but it's also kind of punchy now, and it sits in her lower register, and we can see all of the things she's borrowed from space punk style, and the energy from the Banshees, and the power from Diva, and all of these different things she's come across on her journey to get her where she is now. But despite all of that, the style is still distinctly Eleanor, and she ends on a big brassy "there won't be trumpets" high note. She's Eleanor, but she's also Milady. Chakra is also a fascinating contrast, but it's much more direct because he has completely different styles when he is Trinculus and when he is Chakra. Trink is a Renaissance-ass minstrel. He plays the lute, it's all in his falsetto, there's this warbly Snow White quality to it. It's all very brittle and you kind of feel like you can crush the sound like a paper cup. And Chakra is all power. It's this dark, low musical theater evil where he's barely singing, honestly, he's mostly just shouting. But when he's still pretending to be Trink a little bit, we get this very fun combination of those two sounds that's like sinister jazz, and it's this very theatrical, bouncy kind of noise that immediately sets off alarm bells, and it works perfectly because musical theater does use this jazzy swing sound for silly, weird sidekicks and group numbers, which the Cruelty Stump is, and sinister, campy villains. So the audience might sense that something is off here, but it toes the line so well between Friend Like Me from Aladdin and Puttin' on the Ritz and Friends from the Other Side from Princess and the Frog, where you're never quite sure which way the coin is gonna topple until it does and we're given Chakra. Diva is Tina Turner. It's this like massive, larger than life rock sound that immediately clues the listener in that this can't all be real. At least some of it has to be a mask or compensating, because something that powerful isn't sustainable. And it's not all real, because during Beauty Within, when she's singing to her daughter, that larger than life rock and roll sound is completely gone, and she's got this soft, gentle, almost like Carole King kind of sound. Unlike with Space Punk, where we can see how all of these different parts of him interconnect while still being very honest, or Chakra, who's just distinctly lying, Diva falls somewhere right in the middle, where this caring motherly figure is the real Diva, but the larger than life version is also the real Diva. It's just the part that the world gets to see, with the nice edges sanded down and the power amped way up. It's definitely less natural than Space Punk, but it's realer than Chakra, and that's just sort of where Diva sits as a character. She's not as good as the good guys, but she's also not as bad as the bad guys. She's just right in the middle. The Banshees are confusing, and they're supposed to be. Almost all their songs are fugues, and they're rhythmic and weird and dark, and immediately clue you in that this is a threat. But they also have this very classical sound to them, which instinctively feels ill-fitting and weird as a choice, and that's sort of the point. Because they, along with their music, has been corrupted by the cruelty. By the end of the show, we find out that they are also starmites, and it makes sense because this entire time their music has been based in well-rehearsed complex dynamics and soaring soprano sections and complicated harmonies. It both contrasts and complements the pre-existing sound of the starmites, because no, they're not a poppy barbershop quartet all of a sudden, but it wouldn't really make sense if they were. They are a much older guard of powerful adult women warriors, while the starmites are new teenage boys who have been figuring this out themselves. They're different, but it's clear that both groups are playing from the same rulebook. And finally, Bizarbra doesn't really have her own style. Throughout the entire show, she's just copying or being guided to follow, so she's an off-brand version of Eleanor or mimicking Diva. There's nothing there you can actually point at and go, that's Bizarbra, the way you can with all the other characters in the show. And, hey, that tells us everything we need to know about this character anyway, because she's insecure and awkward and not supposed to be her own person. Having no distinct singing style is perfect. The first and exclusive time we hear any sort of distinct voice from Bizarbra is in the finale, and it's very hesitant and soft and confused. It doesn't feel like its own distinct style or motif yet, because it's not. She is actively starting to discover who she is for the first time in her life, and we leave with the implication that eventually that sound is going to morph into Bizarbra's musical style. We just won't be there to see it. Because obviously this show didn't get a sequel. I think it is goddamn tragic that this show was never successful enough to morph into its own comic book run, because if there has ever been a musical that needs a supplementary comic book run to get into the nuance and lore, it's this one. Like, hey, you want to know the Starmites' absolutely insane lore? Because the show is named after them, and it gets brought up for about 0.5 seconds right at the beginning and never elaborated on, and it is one of the most batshit backstories I have ever heard, so I have to talk about it. There are 2 pages in the back of this libretto of Starmites history that explain that the Starmites were a full society of people who went underground and trained themselves in guerrilla warfare when Chakra came into power, and in turn, Chakra led a genocide that killed every single one of them except for 9-year-old Space Punk, who was able to escape with 7-year-old Ak Ak, 6-year-old Herbie, and 5-year-old Dazzle. So, 9-year-old Space Punk essentially raised the slightly smaller starmites all by himself, using exclusively his memories of the society and the Starmites handbook that Herbie carries around to protect the universe until Milady shows up, and then they can help her save the world. Hey? Hey, what are we doing? And I know that the show is not structured in a way where there would be time for any of that. But what I'm saying is maybe the show should be structured in a way where there can be time for any of that. To Starmite's credit, this feels so much like it's based off a real comic book that it's actually insane. There is a reason there aren't a lot of superhero musicals, and the ones we do have are famously bad. Comic books are a misleadingly complicated type of media, entrenched in just so much lore, which, hey, they got down pat, but it's why 99% of superhero media is origin story retellings. It is the concisest way to go about telling this story without stepping a foot away and immediately getting lost in the weeds with the rest of your audience. And Starmites is technically an origin story. It's just the origin story of Milady. It's sort of like, okay, you know the Tom Holland Spider-Man movies? How the first one is sorta kinda like an origin story, except they've inserted an unbearable amount of Iron Man as a mentor figure? Picture that, but Tony Stark is not a pre-established character. Everyone in the universe just sort of treats him like he is, and there's this implied world relevance, and everyone they come across is aware of Iron Man, but it's just never brought up who he is, and we don't find out anything really about his backstory, not in like a sinister mystery twist ending way. It's just not important. And also the Iron Man movies don't exist. Wouldn't that be crazy? That's essentially what Starmites is. It's one of the most fundamental problems of the show, because the Starmites are the titular characters, and throughout the entire thing they're sort of just treated as a sitcom B-plot cast in a musical? I am not going to sit here and tell you, I can fix this show. I can't. I am sure there is a much more competent writer than me out there who could take it apart and make it more cohesive. That's not me. My only real thought is, it's sort of wild that the Starmite's backstory isn't the opening of the show, right? The way this show opens is with Eleanor sitting on her bed reading a Starmites comic as the mites and Chakra pantomime the fight behind her. And there is no reason I can ascertain that that fight couldn't just be their origin story. Okay, and I should clarify, there are about 1 million versions of this script. It's possible there's like a junior version that I haven't read where that is the case. I don't know. But overall, it's not their backstory. Why not? A lot of versions of the show just use this battle to establish the lore of Milady, which, one, they do later, so they don't need to right now, and two, could also be involved with their backstory because they are training to wait for Milady. You can do both! Call me crazy, but I just think maybe it's a little important. Maybe it's a little tiny bit important to establish who these kids are, or what their motivation is, or why they're like that. They're like that because they were raised by a 9-year-old space punk. As it is, the show doesn't even explain at all why they're massive misogynists. There's a reason. It's in their backstory, and we don't get to know it. Another thing this establishes is their ages during the show, which is less relevant, I'll admit, but still. They all have to be teenagers. So Space Punk at oldest is 19, and at youngest is 17, because Dazzle at oldest is 15, and at youngest is 13. So if you kind of split it down the middle and say, okay, Space Punk and Eleanor are probably like seniors in high school, they're 18. Then Akak is 16. Herbie is 15. And Dazzle is 14 for the entire run of this show. Doesn't that sort of change the context a little? It also retroactively makes the cast recording very funny to listen to, because for some reason the actor they got to play Dazzle gives him this, like, 50-year-old Guys and Dolls Staten Island native voice that kills me when I think about it coming out of the mouth of a 14-year-old boy. Just like... Is Starmites a great show? Debatable, but it doesn't really need to be. It's fun, and it's stupid, and the costumes are wild, and the characters are great, and the songs are entertaining, and that's all I want from it. There are a lot of very valid criticisms for the show, some of which I believe, and it's a clear and desperate bid to get 80s and 90s teenagers to come with the high school age protagonist, and the outdated slang, and the comic books. But beneath all of that, there is a level of heart to it that I really appreciate, and generally am sometimes missing from more modern shows. But I would rather have a million Starmites, a million well-intentioned, perhaps overly creative, unsuccessful Broadway flops, than a single show designed in a lab to make money, which is what a lot of Broadway has been feeling like recently. And look, I understand that Broadway is an industry, and that industries need to make a profit or they will die. And I don't want Broadway to die, but it's like they've forgotten that before it was an industry, it was an art form. And it became that industry so people could keep making art while surviving. Instead, it's just become a numbers game set to music. I mentioned at the very start of this video that Starmites only running for 3 months and having 95 performances was a sign that it was a failure. But recently, that's sort of just a standard Broadway run. Boop, Swept Away, How to Dance in Ohio, Real Women Have Curves. These are all fantastic shows that closed so much sooner than they should have, just because it didn't have an immediate Hamilton-level overnight success. And that can't be the marker. It's just a cycle that is going to get worse and worse as actors lose jobs and audience members are disappointed. We keep reviving big successes and stunt casting leads and forcing jukeboxes, and all that's doing is pissing off established theater people and intimidating newcomers. Because every show closes immediately and ticket prices are insane, and really they're only coming to see the major celebrity you cast who's gonna miss 90% of the performances because they're fucking busy. It's part of why Starmites is never gonna get a revival in any professional capacity. It's just too much of a financial risk. I should establish there are other reasons Starmites isn't getting a professional revival, but you know what I mean. Musical theater is an art form. It is built to be experimental and thought-provoking and fun. And yes, I think there is a place for Mean Girls the Musical, but there is also a place for Phantom of the Opera, and there's also a place for the Three Penny Opera, and there's also a place for Starmites. I am very aware that this is way too big of like a moral grandstanding speech to be giving at the end of a video about this stupid comic book musical. But I just love Starmites, and I think it is so sad that we are moving away from a world where something like it can exist. This is such a bummer to end the video on. I am well aware that I'm biased, but I genuinely think if there was one thing that was different, if this show was an ounce more popular or less when it came out, or there was an 80s quality crappy bootleg floating around, or the cast recording came out less than a decade after the show closed, then it could have achieved cult classification status very easily. It's got all of the aspects of one. It's campy as hell, it's got a great main cast, it's got a genuinely interesting female heroine, Diva is there, and half the plot hinges on finding a weapon of mass destruction that turns out to be an electric guitar. You can even see it in YouTube comments. The people who saw this show on Broadway remember it very fondly. It's kind of interesting to even compare it to another show that came out the same year, the original production of Carrie, because that show at the time was way less successful than Starmites. Starmites got the 6 Tony noms while Carrie was completely snubbed, but Carrie is the one that got the revival and the massive fan base. And yes, I am aware that one of these shows is based off a critically acclaimed Stephen King novel and objectively probably a better musical, and one of them is Starmites, but play in the space with me. I just think, if given the chance, Starmites could have had a beautiful, tiny little Tumblr fandom full of fan fiction about the Starmites' tragic backstory, and fan art of Eleanor and Bizarbra having sleepovers and sharing each other's culture, and everyone would want to make out with Diva. And what a beautiful world that would be. I just want to take 3 seconds, you and me, to sit here in this self-indulgent little corner I have made where we are writing AU fanfiction about our own universe, where the most annoying high school theater kids on the planet are free to base their entire personalities off of a Starmite slime tutorial that does not exist. In reality, I don't think the cult classification of Starmites is ever gonna happen at this point. And if somehow it does, I don't think this far too long YouTube video I'm making to an audience of exactly 0 subscribers is gonna have any hand in it. But I guess if one person can walk away from this video with a new, even slight appreciation for the batshit insanity that is Starmites the musical, I will be happy. That is all I want from this. Actually, that's a lie. I also really want you to go watch the Starmites Tony performance. Please go watch the Starmites Tony performance. Angela Lansbury has to announce the Starmites Tony performance, and then a bunch of teenage boys and a lizard jump out. You have to go watch it right now. It's okay, and I don't think you can really see it that well from my filming setup. So everyone look at my Starmite sweatshirt. Don't look at the mess right here. Look at my Starmite sweatshirt. My sister made it for me. Isn't it incredible? I love it so much. She made it for me like a couple of Christmases ago, and it's my favorite piece of clothing I own. You're all jealous. You're all jealous of my beautiful Starmite swag.